All right, the webinar has started and it is being recorded. Hi, I am Melanie Chrissy. I am Product Marketing Manager here at Netlify. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Jam, Slack, Discord, all of those little places. But I'm here today to welcome you to Netlify's Power User Series. This is a special series we're doing that is focused on how to use a Netlify product to get the most value out of it for your team. We're going to be deep diving into features, talking through use cases and things that maybe you haven't even explored or discovered in Netlify on your own. We have three amazing speakers here with us today to get into all the nitty-gritty and make sure we all walk away learning something new. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope wherever you are well and safe and ready to learn. Just doing a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. Yes, this webinar will be recorded. We will email out the recordings afterwards. We are doing questions and answers today, so please look in Zoom for the Q&A section. There's a chat where we can engage with each other, but there's also Q&A, so if you want something to definitely get addressed at the end, or for me to follow up with you later with information, make sure you drop it in that Q&A bar instead of just the general chat, although we will be looking in both places for information. Because we are running chat today, we will be following the Jamstack Community Code of Conduct. I'll post a link into the chat as soon as I get done speaking so that you can go read that for yourself. But general guidelines, please just be kind, no bullying. Don't say anything that you would be embarrassed for your mom or friend or kids or bosses or coworkers to find out that you said during this chat. We're all here to have a good time, and we just want to keep things really light, but don't be afraid to ask hard questions. So we will enjoy each other's company. Thank you so much for being online with us. All right, so this is day one of the three-part series. Today's theme is developing fast at scale. Everything is at scale. So, just get ready for more scale all week. This is all going to be focused on the Netlify workflow, how to maximize the Netlify workflow. And I've got Mike Chirokas from the product marketing team here with me today to give you an introduction to Netlify Functions. Mike, I'm going to step out of your way so that you can get into the content that you're ready to share.
Thanks so much, Melanie. Thank you. Y'all may have noticed I am not Ingrid. Ingrid was unable to make it today, but happy to talk to you about Netlify Functions and what we're seeing with some of the most advanced teams making the most of the Netlify platform by using different types of Netlify functions. So first of all, let's take a step back and kind of talk about, we're moving from a time when the traditional approach was a monolithic approach of browser, CDN, load balancers, web servers, app layers, and a database layer all kind of compiled into one. But now we're moving to a decoupled web architecture where there's the browser, there's the edge becoming a bigger component, right, as a lot of us are familiar with. And then there's these third-party services, there's a headless CMS, and there's functions. So let's take a look at how we can use some functions, multiple types of functions to create an e-commerce app, a highly dynamic e-commerce app. So for example, let's say we want to send personalized emails based on actions. And these can be really long-running processes in the background, 10 seconds up to 15 minutes. Say you want to compile a PDF of what's in someone's cart and send them that. You can do that. Say you want to update reviews every night. And this is one of our customers, Manscaped, does this. So if you come to a page on an e-commerce site and you see reviews, you actually don't necessarily need to update those in real time or load those in the browser in real time. Basically, you can build those, and then every single night you can schedule a rebuild, whether you push code or not. And then finally, what a lot of us are familiar with already is getting dynamic prices. So if you want to get dynamic prices in an e-commerce app that you need in real time, you can do that with your standard Netlify functions. But there's some pain points that we've seen with deploying functions. So with deploying non-Netlify functions. So for example, there's context switching, right? On average, it takes a developer about 23 minutes to get back to a task once they've been taken out of their flow. I've personally experienced this moving from different repos, deploying functions, coming back to my front end, and then calling those functions, realizing that, nope, that didn't work, and then moving over to Postman. There's 23 minutes in every single one of those breaks just to get back into the context. There's also DevOps dependencies frequently. So we've heard this from teams where, say you've got a web app, you've also got a marketing team. Your marketing team is may need a backend function to, say, send a form or create some automation that we talked about earlier. But we need to wait for the DevOps team to free up because they're focused on keeping the infrastructure up for your web app. So that can become a blocker actually to getting up marketing sites. Sometimes there's a lack of observability with functions. So monitoring and logging of functions, it can get left on the back burner. If you're focused on front-end development, getting your front-end site up and being performant, sometimes monitoring and logging can get left on the back burner. And then finally, there's bulky testing and iterating. This is a very important one, right? When your backend functions live in a different repo from your front-end site, it can get a little bit chaotic in actually having to set up, say you want to test everything locally, you need to go into the repo that has your backend functions, you need to set it up on a local server, then you need to go back into your front-end server, set up run your front-end site, and then make sure everything's connected, make sure they're communicating properly, they're on the same local host. Just becomes an absolute pain. And here's just an illustration of this, right? So you get an AWS account, which if you're just on a personal site, probably not that big a deal. But once you're in once you're at scale, a larger business, this becomes actually a headache in itself, getting access to this AWS account. You write some code, package this up for AWS, you upload this to AWS, set permissions for this function, make sure you set the environment variables, make sure you're storing them properly and securely. Finally, you get an endpoint, you test your function, maybe you're testing that with a front end, maybe you're testing it in Postman, again, context switching. Then you figure out how you're going to get logs. And then eventually you get tired and write some bash to do this for you, which now becomes a snowflake among all your services. And where do you store that? How do you find that? And say you move on to a different project, how does someone else find that? So we're finding that power users of the Netlify platform, they're using Netlify for a lot more than just deploying their sites and just deploy previews. They're using Netlify Functions. They're using Netlify Functions because of this consolidated workflow, right? The context switching that we talked about, those 23 minutes, start to dissolve when everything kind of sits together. You no longer need DevOps and infrastructure to manage, right? So you no longer need to manage, say, a Docker container or Kubernetes or any of these things because it's serverless. And then monitoring and logging, it comes with edge handlers. Logs are right in the Netlify UI, so you can quickly track usage and resolve issues straight from an interface that you're very familiar with already. It's all part of the Netlify workflow. And then there's local development. I can't talk about this one enough, but just setting up developing locally on Netlify and using any front-end framework to proxy requests and test before shipping is way easier when everything when it's a Netlify function through the Netlify platform. It deploys together. You can easily iterate. So we've taken this life cycle of manually deploying a function I just talked about a moment ago that was pretty complex, and we moved it to something much more simple and part of the Netlify workflow, part of your workflow. So getting a Netlify account and connecting your repo, you probably already have one. Write some code and test a function locally with the CLI. So writing and testing that together, pushing the commit, watch Netlify build and ship your function. And then finally, drink some more water, take a few steps because deployment is no longer a concern. So there's a bunch of different types of functions that Netlify offers too. So I wanted to mention these. It's not just your fire and forget functions. It's not just your standard Netlify functions, your Lambda functions. It's also background functions. So these can run from 10 seconds up to 15 minutes if it's a really compute heavy process. There's also event functions built into the platform. So let's take an example of say your boss or someone on your team wants to be notified every single time a deploy fails for some reason, and they want to know what happened. And they're not in Slack, so you can't necessarily use the Slack integration with your deploys. Well, you can actually send them an email based on a failed deploy or based on a successful deploy. And you can automate that with event functions. There's on-demand builders, which we talked about before, building pages when a user visits them for the first time. And then schedule functions is new. Basically, this cron tab makes it super, super easy to schedule long-running or not long-running functions. An example being, I've got a web app, and every single week on a Wednesday, this is a true story, this is what I do. Every single week on a Wednesday, I have a scheduled function, send out an email to everybody that uses the web app, telling them what's in their account and what the next best action is for them. And usually that's personalized. You can do that with scheduled functions. The important thing here isn't necessarily, oh, there's a million types of functions. The important thing is actually removing compute to wherever you need it. An example being, right, Netlify Functions, you need immediate up-to-date information. Okay, that's the Netlify function. You need to build your site. The compute sits in the Netlify build layer. These background functions, these 10-second to 15-minute functions, we also offer those. And then finally, the Netlify Edge, which we'll talk a little bit more, but so far, edge handlers, right, can handle small bits of personalization for your website. So that's a little bit about Netlify Functions, a little bit how we're seeing teams maximize the Netlify workflow using compute wherever you need it. And so I'm going to pass it off to Sean Grove, who's going to tell you a little bit more about Netlify Graph and how power users are using Netlify Graph to develop fast at scale.
Hey, thanks, Mike. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here in just a moment. All right. So yeah, as Mike mentioned, I'm Sean. I work on the Graph team here at Netlify. And kind of the origin of the Graph team is that we live in a pretty wonderful time where there are just a phenomenal number of APIs available that do all sorts of interesting jobs. So, everything from content marketing to sending SMS messages to taking payments. And it's really wonderful because it means that no matter what the job is, there's a tool that is specialized to do that one thing and to do it very, very well. However, this does come with some challenges because for each of those APIs, there is a life cycle, right? You have to figure out what the API has available, how to actually access the API, how to handle authentication, and how to get the data from the API into a useful context, say like your application. And this is a problem that only grows as you scale both across the number of APIs. So as you pull in different sorts of APIs, but also as you scale APIs across your team. So you have to figure out, what is the mental model inside of Stripe or inside of Salesforce? There are a lot of different domain models inside of there. And communicating those domain models across your team can be really, really challenging. Someone who's new to your team may not necessarily be aware of how Salesforce does it. So even if you built up some organizational knowledge of an API, or you yourself have gone through an API and figured out how to use it, it may be very challenging for your team to run very quickly at scale with all these different APIs. And it's kind of interesting to think about because fundamentally, every API only has three particular things you might care about. It has data that you might be interested in, so some sort of read operation. It can perform some sort of action you might be interested in, so sending an email or an SMS message or making a payment. Or it can notify you of some sort of important events, maybe some sort of record in a database has changed, or a payment has been successfully charged. So the origin of Netlify Graph was to look at kind of the fundamental parts of the API and to say that, look, there are only three things that any API can do for you. And so why is it that every time we interact with an API, there is this very, very long drawn out process where you have to find the docs, you have to figure out how to search through the docs, you have to figure out, does this API have the data I want? Does it do the action that I want? And it's typically a very long time from when you first see an API to when you actually can successfully run a test on the API, say with an API auth token. It involves a lot of intermediate steps. And these steps don't really benefit you or your team. It's just kind of an overhead that it takes to actually onboard with these APIs. And that's to say nothing with actually managing these APIs at scale. Figuring out whether that is, how do you get that data inside of the front, a component for the front end team? How does the backend team, how are they aware of the rate limits or the scale requirements of an API? So there's all sorts of intricate requirements that go into managing these APIs. So Graph kind of looks at those fundamental pieces and says, can we normalize this so that whenever you go into any new API, there's always a uniform interface. So the data in each of these APIs is always going to be unique. The actions that they offer is going to be unique. They are specialized tools that are really, really good at the job that they perform. But Netlify Graph puts a overlay on top of that that makes onboarding with them much, much, much easier. So we're going to have some pretty interesting use cases and events on this later, diving really, really deep and showing how Netlify Graph will tie in with different content management systems, Contentful, WordPress, Sitecourse, Entity, e-commerce and web apps and all sorts of things. So keep an eye out for this. I think each of these is going to be really, really interesting. But today I'm just going to show a very simple example of how Netlify Graph can work with the enterprise API, say like Salesforce, and take those very simple primitives that we talked about earlier and translate them into the best practices for your team. So here I have a very simple Next.js application running. You can tell that I am not a front-end developer. The design is lagging, but this is to emphasize how simple all this is going to be. So I have I've started up my Netlify CLI here. And all I've done is said, whenever I'm developing the site, I actually want to participate in the graph. I want to be able to access all those different APIs behind the graph. And it gives me a nice little link that will take me straight to my graph editing page. And this is where I can actually see all the operations that are inside of my application. If I want to connect additional APIs, you can see I can just come through with the catalog and say, maybe I want to have access to GitHub, and I can enable and disable that. So in this case, I'll just go back to our Graph Explorer. And in this case, what I want to do is reach into the Salesforce API, and I want to pull out a list of opportunities that are currently available. So I can just create a new operation. And again, this corresponds directly to those 3 operations we talked about earlier, where you can read data, you can perform some action, or you can be notified of some event. So I'll go ahead and just read some data from Salesforce. And Salesforce is a massive API. It's an incredibly capable tool. So you can see here that I can actually say, show me what's under Salesforce. And I can scroll through. In this case, I know I'm looking for opportunities. So I can simply scroll down to opportunity and I see, oh, here's opportunities. And I can see that it takes a list of parameters. To start with, I'll just go ahead and pull out a list. Maybe I want to get the ID of each of these opportunities. I'll get the name, and let's get the stage name. And if I run this, we run into one of the first challenges that you typically have whenever you're interacting with the API, which is Salesforce does not allow you to make unauthenticated calls. So I have to figure out how to get an OAuth token or an API token somehow. But that's actually built into this already. So I can just go ahead and log into Salesforce. And now when I come back and I run this, I get my list of queries or my list of opportunities right over here. And so I have this ability to immediately start getting data back, even without going and reading the Salesforce docs. I can kind of just browse through the data that's available. In this case, I like this, but actually I would probably like to have the amount of this. And I want to know whether or not it's 1. So I can go ahead and run that. So I can very quickly iterate on the data that I'm going to have inside of my Next.js application. So let's go ahead and give this a title, call this Salesforce opportunities. I'll save this. And that's actually going to sync locally with my Netlify CLI environment. So it notices that I picked that up and it's regenerated that. And now I actually have a local function called Salesforce opportunities. But because Netlify knows that this is a Next.js application, it can actually do much more than that for me. So in this case, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to take this and turn this into a component that's going to be used inside of my Next.js application. So what I want to do is make it so that this is a little bit more robust. Let's say maybe I want to filter the opportunities and I want to get only the ones where the stage name is equal to some variable. And we'll call this variable stage name. So that looks good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Netlify Graph, hey, this is exactly the data I want back, and it takes this variable. Can you generate a Next.js component for me? So whenever I go into my code here, we'll see that we now have two different files generated. The first one is actually the API aspect. And this is going to fetch that Salesforce opportunities that I did over here. And this handles authentication built in as well. And if I hover over this, even though the name is all right, it's fetch Salesforce opportunities, it'd be nice if I could tell my team later on what this actually does. So I'm going to come back into our editor, and I can edit this description right here. I'll say fetch a filtered list of opportunities. And if I save this, once again, this is going to synchronize with my local application development. And then whenever I hover over this, it should see very shortly that it will actually pop up with a new description of the all right, we regenerated. So we should see shortly that it will actually come with the description. And the other beautiful thing here is that as I type this data, so I call this function of, get this data for me. It auto completes for me each step along the way. So it knows all of the data that's actually available here, and it knows the type of them as well. So as I actually float over this, the list of opportunities is going to have all of the different say edges, nodes, map. So we get the node, and we get all of this field names here. And each step along the way, if I hover over it, I get actually the description of that field. So this is kind of a self-documenting SDK client that we've built up from scratch using Netlify Graph. So the Salesforce API is incredibly complex and has so many different bits of data available. So we can actually very quickly explore that, put together a function, and then document it for both us and for our future teammates to use. But the other part of this is that I'll go ahead and delete this. It comes with the auth built in. Now you can use the auth that I used inside of the Graph Explorer just a moment ago. But I'm going to take this a step further and say that actually this is an internal tool, and I want my sales team to log into Salesforce in order to use this tool. And this is an incredibly difficult concept. Normally, this is going to involve setting up some sort of client-side OAuth flow. But in this case, actually, because Netlify knew that this is a Next.js application and knew all the variables, it actually generated a form for me. So in this case, I'll say I want to look for any stages or any opportunities that are in the prospecting stage. And if I submit that, let me refresh this. Let me give this a slightly different name. We'll save that. We'll generate a new handler. All right, and then same idea as before. And now we get that description here. All right, and so we'll go to the fetch the new form. Prospecting. And you'll notice that it automatically detects that I don't have the client side auth built in. I'm not logged into Salesforce inside of my application, but that's already generated as part of this form. So I'll go ahead and log in, and it automatically reruns that opportunity or that query. And now I'm getting back live data from my Salesforce API. And I can start to style this or build individual components out of this straight from here. And so now I have a well-typed API that has all of the types, all of the documentation, all of the authentication automatically generated for me. And this actually works for even very advanced use cases. So let's say, for example, I want to listen to live subscriptions from Salesforce. And anytime an opportunity is updated, I want to get some new information about it. I want to know what has changed. So maybe in this case, I'll say I want to know whether it's one, I want to know the ID, I'll get the name, and you can also type in here, let's do the amount and the stage name. So if I run this, it's just going to sit here and wait for some data. We don't have any data coming through as of yet. But over here in Salesforce, if I come in and I edit my opportunity, let's say I'll change this to a $500,000 deal, and we just move further along to our probability, And if I save that, you can see it immediately comes over here and is updated here. And again, this will generate that Next.js API endpoint so that you'll get real-time webhooks that are come in. They are cryptographically signed to make sure that they are absolutely secure. And this kind of integration is typically days, weeks, or even months of work to be able to get this fidelity of real-time data with authentication securely coming in from Salesforce into your Next.js application. And all we did was kind of click around, express the data that we want, give it some names, and now both us and our teammates are going to be able to scale out to this API. And any API behind the Netlify Graph service actually benefits from this exact same experience. So that's a whirlwind tour of just the high level of enterprise APIs with Netlify Graph. And I'm happy to hand it off to Jason now.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Very, very cool demo. So hi, everyone. My name is Jason Berry. I am a software engineer here at Netlify, previously co-founded FeaturePeek, a dev tool SaaS company acquired by Netlify in 2021. When you look at companies developing web products at scale, you can't help but notice some inefficiencies in the processes. Some of it is due to the shift to distributed and asynchronous work. We can't really QA designs and implementations as easily in person as we used to. Cross-functional teams need new ways of collaborating. And I'd like to talk about some of the inefficiencies that exist today in collaborating and some tooling that can help. So there are three kind of big areas I'd like to talk about. The first is inefficient workflows. So how many times have you as a developer pushed to production only to be met with a deluge of feedback from your colleagues? It's great that your team cares to leave feedback, make their voices heard, but in production it's too late. It's too late in the process. It's already shipped. Your users are seeing the changes already. The best time for developers to solicit feedback during the software development cycle is while the pull requests are still open. The problem is that your non-technical stakeholders don't really have good visibility into pull requests. They might not be familiar with Git or have a GitHub account, for example. The shortest feedback loops occur while the pull request is still open. Another problem that exists is scattered feedback. How many times have you've been crawling through disparate Slack channels, maybe even email requirements in Notion or third-party issue trackers, et cetera? Reviewers don't know the best channel or medium to leave feedback about upcoming changes. And furthermore, it's too easy for reviewers not to know if they're even looking at the latest version, right? Sometimes they could be QAing off the QA branch, only to find out that the problem that they're writing a bug report about, the developer's already fixed. Yeah, good news that the developers already fixed your bug, but bad news, you just wasted all this time writing a bug report for a problem that's already been fixed. Finally, there's often a lack of context in bug reports. There's critical information like the browser name, version, screenshots, screen recordings, even the URL can be omitted in a bug report. Anything that's not automatic is bound to be there not 100% of the time. And it's the developers who waste their time clarifying this context that should have been there from the beginning. So all of these hindrances are indicative of a tooling problem. That's right, a tooling problem. But with great tooling problems come great tooling solutions. And I'd like to talk about a solution that we have called collaborative deploy previews. So yes, poor feedback loops are actually a tooling problem. If you're noticing that developers and non-developers are struggling to collaborate on your team, they may not have the tools that they need to work together efficiently. So Netlify has this product called Collaborative Deploy Previews. You might be familiar with deploy previews, which are a dedicated, isolated environment per pull request that gets created as soon as the pull request gets opened. It makes it really easy to test your changes in isolation. What makes them collaborative is that we overlay a UI toolbar on top of the page, on top of the deploy preview, that syncs with your version control software, GitHub, GitLab, self-hosted. It lets your team comment on your changes of the pull requests of the deploy preview, and it syncs those comments back to the corresponding pull requests. It integrates with issue tracking tools you already use and love. It can record browser data automatically, take screenshots, screen recordings, And the coolest part is you can invite as many reviewers to your Netlify team for free. Reviewers are absolutely free. You can invite an unlimited amount, which is great for non-technical stakeholders. But the best way to tell you about this is to show you. So we've got a little demo here that I'm going to run. So here I have a deploy preview that my colleague created. You can see some text on the page, some illustrations with hover effects, but you can also see this overlay at the bottom of the window. This UI overlay provides tools that you can use with your team to collaborate on the deploy preview and on the pull request. I can click this button in the bottom left, and a drawer slides out from the left side of the window containing all the detail from the pull request. Data from the corresponding pull requests, like the description, any labels, comments, etc., are always kept in sync right here in the deploy preview. I can see some of the comments my teammates have left. And because they wrote them using collaborative deploy previews, things like browser details, like the browser name and version, the OS, the viewport size, the URL, where on the page that the comment was written on. These are all saved automatically. So I'm reading this comment here from my colleague. I can just click this link and be taken right to the page that they were on when they left that comment. So this context, again, is included all automatically. You don't have to do anything special. So no more hunting down reviewers for more information. Okay, so I have some idea of some feedback I want to leave my colleague on this particular page in their deploy preview. And I think the best way to communicate that idea is by a visual annotation. So I'm going to take a screenshot. I'm just going to click this screenshot button down here, grant permission. This is a brief countdown to get situated, and an annotation modal pops up. So I can just go ahead and I'm going to crop this area where I was talking about, and just going to circle some areas I think could use improvement. I'm going to click the use in a new comment button, and a markdown formatted image appears in a text area inside the comment in the drawer. I can preview what it looks like. Yep, that looks about right. And I'm going to get the author of this pull request's attention by @replying them. So I'm going to say, hey, Eric, and this pulls up an autocomplete list of everyone within my GitHub org. Can you address this? Looks like these aren't aligning on my viewport size. Now I'm going to click this comment here. And there it is, my comment left right there with all of my browser metadata along with it. So this is how it looks like in the drawer on the deploy preview, but it also gets synced to the pull request. So I can go ahead and click this and just see what my comment looks like. And this is the comment I just left. So if anyone on my team was already on the pull request, they could see it here, take a look at my browser metadata, jump right back into the deploy preview, or maybe even preview what my changes look like, or what I saw by emulating the browser on BrowserStack. So again, this is synced to the pull request. It doesn't just work with GitHub. We also support GitLab and GitLab self-hosted. This is perfect for non-technical stakeholders because they may not use GitHub or GitLab, but they're still able to leave comments and feedback and make their opinion heard by leaving a comment here. You can invite an unlimited amount of free reviewers to your team, which is, again, perfect for non-technical stakeholders. And they can weigh in their opinion at the perfect time of the software development cycle when the issue is still fresh for the developers' minds. All right, so that's how you leave comments on a deploy preview. What about filing issues to third-party issue trackers like Jira or Trello? Well, we have this integrations tab here with a bunch of services from third parties. I'm going to go ahead and authenticate with one. So let's do Jira. I'm going to click this connect button and it pops open this authentication window. It goes through the OAuth flow. Just going to grant permissions here. And when it completes, I'm authorized with my Jira account right here in the Netlify drawer. So when I go to the new issued tab in the pane, I see a new Jira tab right here at the top. And I can use this for for filing a new issue. So I'm just going to do a quick example here. Not going to fill out all of the form details, but you can see I can choose between a story, task, bug, or epic. This is just Jira nomenclature, but we have specific integrations for all of the providers that we listed here on the integrations pane. And because Eric authored this pull request, I'm going to assign it to him. And if you make some labels, they will appear here as well. I'm just going to go ahead and submit that as an example. And when I create the issue, I can get a preview of what it looks like. So this is, I'm taken to my Jira project directly. All of the information I filled out in the form, as well as my browser metadata, gets saved here as well, already assigned to Eric with the appropriate labels. Super fast way to file issues on these third-party trackers without having to bounce around between tabs and so forth. It's all the information is available from just a click away. It's here in the drawer when you need it. So we've just left some comments. We've touched on filing issues on third-party providers. There's one more thing I want to showcase, and that's when sometimes a screenshot doesn't do a justice, right? Sometimes you want to maybe capture an animation or a hover effect, which is kind of hard to do in a static screenshot. Well, we've partnered with Loom to provide screen, camera, and microphone recordings so that you can leave asynchronous feedback via video without even needing a Loom account, which is super cool. I'm going to show you how to do that now. Just open the drawer, head over to our integrations pane, and we've got this integration here, Loom. So I'm just going to enable it. You can see this Loom button now appears in the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. I'm going to grant some permissions here. Oh, there I am. Hello. And yeah, let's start a recording. Choose which screen I want to record. There's a brief countdown here. And I'm just going to say, hey, I love the changes you made. Go ahead and ship it. Yeah. Get a little preview of the recording and what that looks like. And I'm just going to say, hey, I love the changes you made. Go ahead and ship it. All right. And yeah, let's use this in a new comment. This has already been uploaded to Loom. I can preview what it looks like here and just comment. Boom. The Loom message gets saved, synced directly to the pull request. So any asynchronous feedback, I can capture, animations or maybe some scroll effects or some browser resizing issues that might have popped up. I can record those so that my developer colleague can know exactly what I'm talking about and can reproduce the issue much quicker. So really quick, I just wanted to review. I just recorded my screen, my camera and microphone to leave a video message on the pull request. Don't need a Loom account. Don't need to install any browser extensions or anything. Don't even need a GitHub account or a GitLab account. All you need is a Netlify account. And you can invite unlimited free reviewers to your team so that they're able to leave this kind of feedback. So those are three of the big features of collaborative deploy previews. There's way more I don't necessarily have time to go into. I just want to highlight on a few of them. We have access to deploy logs, so you can see the logs that were created when this was built. You can also pull up your function logs if your site uses functions, just like Ingrid talked about before. And you can pull those logs that pertain to the context of this this deploy preview in particular. You can pull up a QR code to quickly scan to transfer this URL from your desktop to your mobile device. And there's so much more. It's jam-packed with features. We can't wait for you and your team to try it out and let us know what you think. Awesome, very cool. And I'm going to pass it back to Melanie, who's going to lead us in some Q&A. Take it away, Melanie.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jason, for walking through everything. I never get sick of seeing the deploy preview functionality and how it works. So neat. We do have so many questions from the group. I think we can get to all of them. I'm going to kind of work backwards from the topic we were most close to, and then I'm going to reach for some of those earlier questions that came in through Q&A. So just bear with me. There are 13 different questions. I think we can get to most of them. A lot of them are around collaborative deploy previews. So lots of people had questions. Jason, how do you invite the non-technical colleagues, stakeholders to use the deploy previews with you? Do they have to have a Netlify account? How does that work? Do you do it over email? What is the deal?
That's a great question. All you need is to send them the URL of a deploy preview. If they'll probably be logged out by default, but I didn't show the logged out state. But the same bar comes up from the bottom, and you can either log in if you already have an account, or you can create a new account right there. If they do create a new account, they'll automatically be associated as a reviewer on your team. So all they need to do is verify their email address. It's signed up via email password, and they verify their email address, come right back, and boom, they're a reviewer on your team.
Fantastic. Yeah. And all of those reviewer roles are free seats. So, many Netlify seats, if you're deploying, committing code, you have to have a certain number for your team to have access to log into the console or make an update to your project. All those reviewer seats for deploy previews are totally free. So invite as many people as you want. There was a question from Khalifa. Is mobile, and this may be more of like a product request, but is mobile screen support on the horizon for previews? We cannot take screenshots or recordings currently if we're in the browser responsive mobile mode. Is this something that we've thought about in terms of giving that feedback when you're on the mobile view?
Totally. Another great question. So I think you might be referring to like the mobile view of the desktop, like emulating mobile view. As far as I know, on the actual mobile device, the same browser APIs that we use on the desktop are not available, but you can emulate them in like responsive mode of your browser. But it is on the roadmap. We have not got to it yet.
Okay, fantastic. I think those were the major questions about deploy preview. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Netlify Graph. So there were several questions around Netlify Graph about like, what is the specific, how does an API end up in that list of APIs that you can test? Can you test any API and explore it? Can you bring your own API to that situation? Or is it kind of just the preset list that's there? Tell us about those Netlify Graph integrations.
Yeah, so Netlify Graph behind the scenes is powered by GraphQL. And what we've done is we've identified some really valuable APIs and worked with some partners like Salesforce and whatnot to be able to wrap their non-GraphQL API inside of a GraphQL wrapper so that they can be part of the Netlify Graph experience. So that's kind of the first wave where we worked with individuals to see what does that feel like to actually take your non-GraphQL API and put it onto something like Netlify Graph. Pretty soon, we will be rolling out a bring your own GraphQL endpoint. So if you have a GraphQL API, you'll be able to plug it in and have the same experience for your internal team. Yeah, so that's kind of the long-term plan. So right now, it's GraphQL APIs that we have worked with, and pretty soon it'll be any GraphQL API.
Beautiful. So I guess along those same lines, and like, I feel like I want the answer to be no. Is there a public roadmap for the graph services? I would prefer that we don't share roadmaps because I hate to set expectations with people. Product teams are always changing and evaluating, but like, is there a place where people can follow along with developments or send in requests? What do we have available?
So I think right now there is a GitHub repository for Netlify Labs where people can just kind of have discussions and ask questions about it and request different APIs. And we're happy to work, especially in the early days, we're happy to work kind of hand in hand with individuals to make sure that the process of getting an API onto Netlify Graph is as pleasant as possible.
Fantastic, great. Okay. There was a question about serverless functions from an anonymous guest in our chat today. I want to make sure we do answer. Does serverless get rid of cold start issues that you see with things like Heroku? And I feel this because I remember my first like Jamstack site, I was kind of Jamstacky, was on Heroku, and it was like so slow the first time I visited it to check on it, it would take like, 30 seconds to boot up or something. It felt like forever, but then it would be fast after that. So talk to us about cold starts with serverless. What can people expect and what do you get instead or in return?
Yeah, I could take that one if you want to elaborate too. That's cool. So there are still some cold starts. So these are built on top of AWS Lambdas. So whether you do it in AWS or the key to Netlify Functions is that we make it much easier. It talks about the workflow, much easier to deploy these, manage these, test these locally. So yeah, but once you hit it and it's cached, it'll be faster.
Yeah. And my understanding too, and somebody gut check me when we get done, we can follow up, but I believe it's like location specific on the CDN. So the edge network includes the content delivery network that you would expect that deploys your content from all over the globe. If it happens to be cached at that location close to that request, it should be faster, but maybe that first time you get that little delay. So that is kind of just one thing to expect. All right. Well, there were a few okay, so here's a question I think I can answer. Somebody asked, what is the cost for cron jobs in Netlify? My belief is that they are free on all plans. Is that true? Does anybody know the cron job feature?
I think it follows the same pricing guidelines as functions, as Netlify Functions. It falls within Netlify Functions.
Your scheduled functions are treated like normal functions. So just watch the pricing page for your like metered, upgrade, but you should be able to try them out, I think, at least without incurring a cost. Okay, hold on. I see some follow-up questions, but there's so many questions here now. There's like 17 questions in chat. So I'm just going to pick a few more. We do have time. So let me make sure I get to a few more of these. Gerald asks, is Netlify able to support interactive HTML5 WebGL websites? Does anybody know the answer to this one?
I don't see why not.
I can't see why not either. I want to ask.
If it's all front end, HTML5 and WebGL. If you can host it anywhere, you can pretty much host it here.
Perfect. All right, switching back to Graph. Question from Igor. Will you provide a Netlify API for Node.js clients to use Graph? Have we thought about that at all?
Yeah, so the current Netlify API client will work or should work on Node.js and the browser as well. And then we actually have additional plans to generate, say, clients to be able to use it inside of Go functions. So Netlify Functions also supports Go, for example. And we want you to be able to use all of the Netlify Graph across all these different endpoints.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see. I just want to make sure that we get to, there were a couple of more on here. One of the questions somebody asked, which I think is important to clarify, it's kind of a housekeeping question as well. But this week we're posting, tons of content every day. We're going to be looking at new features together every day. We'll be doing a little bit of fireside chat along the way. This is not a formal series in the sense that there won't be certificates, there's not a test at the end. We're not going to be giving anybody Netlify power user badges or anything like that at this juncture. But we are so glad you are here. We will, however, one of the questions came up was, will you share the slides and the content? And so we will be sharing the recordings out. We will be sharing the slide material out. So you have all of that you can take with you and study up if you want. There's just no kind of gold star process at this point in time. Let's see. Are there any other ones in here that we need to make sure not to miss? Dre asked a question about collaborative deploy previews with Bitbucket repos.
Yes, so deploy previews aren't currently supported by Bitbucket, and we are unfortunately blocked on an issue there. Dre, I believe I answered one of your comments and I posted a link to one of our forums posts. But if you would like that, then I would encourage commenting perhaps on Atlassian's side, because we are unfortunately blocked, not just collaborative deploy previews, but deploy previews in general. We can't listen for the exact webhook events. So yeah.
A little bit of a limitation there. Related to deploy previews, in a situation, Godfrey asked, in a situation where there are so many pull requests, how would you recommend filtering based on the names of the contributors? Are there tools on the GitHub side that make it easy to filter through things, or, what do you recommend?
Gotcha. So like filtering a list of all the open pull requests to see like where you can leave comments. Stay tuned. We want to get to that. Right now, reviewers don't have access to look at any of the Netlify UI. That is like app.netlify.com. They only are granted permission to look at deploy preview URLs and log into the drawer. But we do want to have some type of interface where they can see a bird's eye, 10,000 foot overview of, okay, where exactly are the best places for me to leave feedback, contribute feedback right now.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. More questions about deploy previews. There's a question about, we use Docker with the GitLab continuous integration. Can we use deploy previews if we're using GitLab?
You can use deploy previews if you're using GitLab. However, you need to decouple your front end from your back end. So I'm not sure what you're using Docker for there. We don't spin up customer Docker images, for example, but if you have a static build or like a Next.js site or something that taps into like serverless functions and any like static or Jamstacky type of front end, we can deploy on Netlify. So yeah, you'll have to separate, pull those front end contents out of the Docker container. But once you do that, then yes, it will work on GitLab. Fantastic,
great. Okay, I think I'm gonna wrap with like just one or two more questions. So there was one question from Gerald about just how easy and user-friendly can Netlify be for non-technical users, for example, compared to something like WordPress. I have thoughts and feelings about this one, but I wonder, Mike, how do you think about introducing people to Netlify if maybe their background is a CMS like WordPress that's more like a monolith? What's your idea there?
Yeah, so we talked about a little bit of functionality and collaborating with developers. I think Netlify still believes in the future of software development, software developers, and this decoupled architecture. But we also believe that not every single developer needs to know the full stack, getting into Docker containers, Kubernetes. And so it makes it much more simple to start out with software development than before. I'll give you a very personal example. The first site I ever made was all HTML and CSS. I didn't even know anything about deployment, and I dragged and dropped my HTML and CSS file into Netlify. And then it just went into the internet and I could share it with my friends. So it's a very, very good place to start if you're moving from what was the traditional WordPress, which a lot of teams are moving away from, to a decoupled approach. This is a place to start.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, as somebody who's a very novice coder, like codes for fun on the weekends, but is not a pro, I feel like Netlify made it so accessible to me to like start with a boilerplate template, learn how to code, change out some of the content. But then like, if you really want to abstract all of the code away, so maybe you're working with a marketing team or content writers who just don't even care to learn the code part, or they don't have time, or that's just not part of their role at work, you can, plug in your CMS, make it all headless, give them an interface and partner with them to bring things to life. And I think it just gives you so much flexibility when you set it up that way. So that's my 2 cents on that one. Oh my gosh, y'all just keep bringing the questions. Like, let's just keep going. Are y'all okay? Does anybody need a water break? Anybody need to go walk the dog or something? We'll cover a couple more. Okay, we got one. How do you connect to GitHub to Netlify? From an anonymous person, but great question. Beginner questions are totally welcome. When you sign up for Netlify, when you get into your little onboarding ramp sequence, it'll ask you, what's your name? What are you working on today? There will be an option there that will say, connect to your repo or start with a template on your machine. you can right there in that moment, if you already have a GitHub repo that you've got your project in, you can select it and Netlify will pair them together. You can also skip that step and do it later if you want. So any time in the UI, when you create a new site, you'll get that same little wizard where you can choose your Git repo. So it should be easy to do that within the user interface. But if you do get stuck, please ask us out on the answer forums. We would love to point you in the right direction so you can get it connected. Okay, let's see here. There were several questions about what features are on which service tiers. So I will just say off the bat, everything we've been looking at today is available in Netlify's starter plans. Things may be metered where if you use a certain amount of functions, for example, or if you add certain teammates, you might want to go up to pro or business. But I don't think we've covered anything in the session today that is locked down to our enterprise plans. Can I get some head nods? We haven't looked at anything that's, locked down. Although later this week, we will be looking at some of those more powerful enterprise team features. So do check out the pricing page if you have questions. I know there's a lot on there, but I think everything we've covered today should be accessible to all users. Gerald has another question. Netlify sells the vision of Netlify uniting the entire ecosystem of modern tools and services into a single, simple workflow for high performance sites and apps. But how seamless can it be for users of the front end website? Does anybody want to weigh in on the vision for the ecosystem and keeping everything seamless and simple along the way?
Yeah, I think where this question is for the user, like the end customer, the customer experience of your sites. I think, as we think about the future of digital experiences, customer experiences, having the flexibility to design perfect workflows for customers is a requirement. And I think being able, when we say unite an ecosystem, it's really being able to bring APIs, best-in-class APIs together to do that, right? So the APIs you use today may not be the ones you use 5 years from now, but being able to, plug and play those a little bit easier is definitely how you can create seamless customer journeys. Taking like the ideal design, right? Have you ever gotten a design from a designer and you've been like, well, in my monolithic platform or something along those lines, I just can't do that, or that's going to take so much time to get there. On Netlify with a decoupled architecture and different ways of using serverless functions, whether it's on the edge or off the edge, you can actually achieve those.
Yep, I agree. I think it can be as seamless as you have ambition to develop. Is kind of my sense there. All right, well, we are at time on the hour. I so appreciate everybody bringing your energy, your questions. I mean, the chat was just lighting my heart up with everybody with locations all over the globe, in the Philippines and Ukraine and Lagos. And I mean, just the crew here today was amazing. So I hope that you enjoyed connecting with each other. I hope that you learned something new. We will wrap it up for now. If you do have a question, have a project, want to talk to a member of our sales team, the QR code on the screen here will take you to a page where you can reach out and get support. Talk to somebody about the pricing plan that's right for your business. If you're ready for that at this point in time, we invite you to do that. Otherwise, if you're here to learn, join us tomorrow. We're going to have a session tomorrow, shipping and iterating fast at scale, how to release more frequently and reliably. And Todd Morey from the product marketing team is going to be here with Bhavana. We'd love to see you again on Wednesday. So that is it for the day. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mike, Jason, Sean, and Lisa for running the webinar for us today. We will see you later.